The Mwakazi estate had never looked more magnificent. Sunlight poured through towering glass windows, spilling across polished marble floors that reflected the elegance of the occasion. White roses lined the aisle in perfect symmetry, their fragrance soft but persistent, blending with the quiet hum of expensive conversations and restrained curiosity. It was meant to be a celebration. A union of power, legacy, and family pride. But beneath the beauty of it all, something darker lingered, something sharp enough to be felt in every whisper, every glance, every suppressed smile. Because this was no ordinary wedding. At the center of it all sat the groom. Ethan Mwakazi. Still. Composed. Unmoving. Seated in a wheelchair. From a distance, he looked every bit the man he used to be, broad shoulders, sharp features, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that spoke of wealth and authority. But as soon as the eye dropped just slightly, the illusion shattered. The chair was impossible to ignore. And the room did not try. They say he used to be unstoppable. What happened to him again? An accident, or something else? And now this. A quiet laugh slipped through a group of guests seated to the side. What kind of woman agrees to marry a man who can't even stand beside her? Either a fool, or someone very clever. Ethan heard everything. He had learned to. Not because he wanted to, but because silence had become louder than words in his life. People rarely spoke to him anymore. They spoke around him, as if his presence didn't require acknowledgement. As if he had already been erased. His fingers rested lightly on the armrests of the chair, steady, controlled. Only the faint tension in his jaw betrayed the storm beneath his calm exterior. Once, he had commanded rooms like this. Once, people stood when he entered. Now. They leaned closer to whisper when he wasn't supposed to hear. Tell me this isn't real. The voice cut through the murmurs, smooth and amused, carrying just enough volume to draw attention without appearing intentional. Ethan didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew that voice. Liam. His younger brother moved through the aisle with effortless confidence, his presence immediately drawing eyes. Dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, he carried himself like a man who had never known limitation, never been forced to question his place in the world. His gaze swept over the decorations, the guests, the carefully arranged setting, before settling on Ethan. And then he smiled. Slow. Sharp. Unforgiving. This, Liam said, gesturing lightly around the hall, is actually happening. A few nearby guests shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, pretending not to listen while clearly doing exactly that. Ethan's voice, when he spoke, was quiet. Walk away, Liam. Liam's smile widened slightly. Walk, he repeated, tilting his head just enough to let the word settle. You always did have a strange sense of humor. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. Ethan did not react. From behind Liam, another figure approached, slower, quieter, but no less commanding. Noah. Where Liam's presence was loud and cutting, Noah's was controlled, deliberate. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held something deeper, something that lingered too long, observed too much. He stopped a few steps away from Ethan, his gaze steady. This doesn't have to happen, Noah said. His voice was soft. But it carried. Ethan lifted his eyes, meeting his brother's gaze. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. No woman, Noah continued, stepping closer, chooses a man who cannot stand beside her. The words were not loud. But they landed harder than any shout. Liam circled slightly, his tone light but laced with cruelty. Let's be honest, Ethan, he said, lowering himself just enough to be at eye level. What exactly are you offering her? His eyes dropped deliberately, to the wheelchair. Then rose again. Because whatever it is, it's not enough to make this real. A few guests looked away. Others didn't. Some watched with quiet fascination, drawn to the unfolding humiliation as if it were part of the entertainment. Ethan inhaled slowly. Deep. Measured. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, pain, sharp and fleeting, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. You're done, he asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. Liam let out a soft breath, amused. Not even close. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping, becoming more personal. Cancel the wedding. Ethan's jaw tightened. Save yourself the embarrassment. Noah stepped closer now, his presence colder, more invasive. You think she loves you? He asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer. Noah tilted his head slightly, studying him. Or do you think she's simply playing her part, waiting for the moment she realizes what this life will actually be? A pause. Then, when she does, Noah added softly, she'll regret it. Something shifted inside Ethan. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But enough. And when she regrets it, Noah continued, his voice dipping into something darker, I'll be there. That was it. Not the laughter. Not the whispers. Not the pity disguised as curiosity. That. Ethan's eyes hardened. For the first time, there was something dangerous in them. For once, he said, his voice low but firm, stay away from what's mine. The room went still. Liam blinked, then let out a slow, impressed breath. Yours, he repeated, almost entertained. You really believe that? Before Ethan could respond, the doors opened. The sound silenced everything. Every whisper. Every movement. Every thought. All eyes turned. At the entrance stood the bride. She was draped in white, her figure framed by the soft light pouring in from behind her. The veil covering her face was delicate, almost weightless, revealing nothing clearly, but hinting at everything. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Noah's gaze sharpened. Because suddenly, the question wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about her. She began to walk forward. Slowly. Gracefully. There was no hesitation in her steps. No visible doubt. No sign of regret. And as she moved down the aisle, something began to change in the room. The whispers faded. The judgment softened. Curiosity turned into something else. Something sharper. Because she didn't look like a woman making a mistake. She looked like a woman making a decision. Ethan watched her approach, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. For the first time that day, he felt uncertain. Not because of the whispers. Not because of his brothers. But because of her. Who was she, really? And why had she chosen him? The distance between them closed. Step by step. Moment by moment. Until finally, she stood before him. Close enough to touch. Close enough to see the faint outline of her lips beneath the veil. The room waited. Held in suspended tension. Because in that moment, one truth echoed in every mind present. Nothing about this marriage made sense. And yet, it was happening. And as Ethan looked up at the woman who had just changed the course of his life, he had no idea that she hadn't come to love him. The wedding ended too quickly. What should have stretched into laughter, music, and celebration dissolved into strained smiles and forced congratulations. Conversations felt hollow, eyes lingered too long, and beneath every polite exchange lay the same unspoken thought. Something was wrong with this marriage. Zara felt it in every glance that followed her as she moved through the hall beside Ethan. Even after the vows were spoken, even after she said, I do, with unwavering calm, the judgment had not faded. If anything, it had deepened. By the time they returned to the Mwakazi mansion, the sun had already begun to dip, leaving behind a quiet, uneasy dusk. The house welcomed them with silence. Not warmth. Not comfort. Silence. Zara stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, her veil now gone, her face fully revealed. She could feel the weight of the house immediately, the way it watched, the way it held its breath. Behind her, Ethan was wheeled in by one of the staff before he dismissed them with a quiet nod. I can manage from here, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, fatigue, perhaps, or something heavier. They gathered in the main sitting room. All of them. Ethan. Zara. Liam. Noah. And at the center, like the anchor of it all, Mama Eleanor. No one spoke at first. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, filled with everything that had happened earlier, the humiliation, the tension, the spectacle they had made of what should have been sacred. Zara remained standing, her posture straight, her expression composed, though she could feel their eyes on her again. Studying. Measuring. Waiting. And then Noah moved. It was subtle. Quiet. But deliberate. Before anyone could question it, his hand reached forward and, without warning, lifted Zara's veil completely away from her face. The room froze. Didn't react. But inside, her pulse spiked. For a moment, no one spoke. No one breathed. Because what they saw was not what they expected. She was breathtaking. Not just beautiful, but striking in a way that demanded attention without asking for it. Her features were soft yet defined, her eyes deep and unreadable, her presence commanding in a way that felt almost unreal. Liam let out a low breath, the smirk on his lips fading into something more genuine. "Well," he murmured. "That explains a lot." Noah didn't speak. But his gaze darkened. Deepened. Lingering far longer than it should have. Mama Eleanor sat back slightly, her expression shifting for the first time that evening. Surprise. Then approval. "You are remarkable," she said slowly. Zara inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the words without responding. But the shift in the room was undeniable. The judgment hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed. Now it wasn't why did she agree to marry him. It was, why would a woman like her choose Ethan? And that question was far more dangerous. Liam leaned back in his seat, his gaze never leaving Zara. "Now I'm curious," he said, his tone light but edged with something sharper. "What exactly convinced you to go through with this?" Zara met his eyes. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. "I made a choice," she replied. Liam smiled. "That's not an answer. Not every answer is meant to satisfy you." A pause. Then he laughed. Softly. Genuinely amused. "I like her," he said, glancing briefly at Noah. "She's not as predictable as I thought." Noah's gaze remained fixed on Zara. "You shouldn't assume you understand her," he said quietly. Zara didn't respond. But she felt it. The shift. The attention. The tension building beneath the surface. Ethan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "That's enough." His voice wasn't loud. But it carried authority. For a moment, even Liam fell quiet. Zara glanced at him then, really looked at him. There was no anger in his expression. No frustration. Just quiet control. "I think we've had enough for one day," Ethan continued. "We should all get some rest." Mama Eleanor nodded. "Yes. This discussion can wait." But the looks exchanged in that room said otherwise. Nothing was waiting. Everything had already begun. Later that night, the house fell into silence once more. Zara lay beside Ethan, staring at the ceiling, her body still, her mind anything but. The events of the day replayed in fragments, the wedding, the humiliation, the unveiling, the way Liam had looked at her, the way Noah had watched her. Nothing about this house felt safe. And yet, she wasn't afraid. That should have worried her. Beside her, Ethan had already fallen asleep, his breathing steady, his face softened by rest. Zara turned slightly, studying him in the dim light. He looked peaceful. Untouched by the chaos that surrounded him. For a brief moment, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. Not strategy. Not calculation. Something else. She looked away quickly. No. That wasn't part of the plan. The dryness in her throat pulled her from her thoughts. Water. She needed water. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, her movements quiet enough not to wake him. The silk of her nightdress brushed softly against her skin as her feet met the cold floor. She moved toward the door, opened it slowly, and stepped into the corridor. The mansion at night felt different. Quieter. Darker. More honest. Zara walked slowly, her footsteps light, her senses alert. She had just turned toward the staircase, when suddenly, a hand grabbed her. Hard. Her body jerked as she was pulled backward, her breath catching sharply as her back collided with a solid chest. Strong. Warm. Unyielding. Easy. The voice was low. Close. Dangerously familiar. Liam. Zara's heart slammed violently against her ribs. "Let go of me," she said, her voice sharp despite the shock. But he didn't. His grip tightened just slightly at her waist, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her of how easily he could hold her there. "I was waiting for you," he murmured, his breath brushing lightly against her ear. Zara's pulse quickened. Her mind sharpened. Her instinct screamed. This was danger. Real danger. "Wife," he repeated, amused. His eyes locked onto hers. Dark. Hungry. Curious. "You don't feel like a wife," he said quietly. Zara held his gaze, refusing to look away. "And you don't act like a brother," she replied. For a moment, something shifted. Then Liam smiled. Slow. Dangerous. "Good," he said. Because in that moment, both of them knew. This wasn't just a mistake waiting to happen. Morning came too quickly. Zara hadn't slept. Not really. Her body had rested, but her mind had refused to surrender. Every time she closed her eyes, the night replayed itself, the sudden grip at her waist, Liam's voice low against her ear, the heat of his presence far too close, far too real. And the worst part? She hadn't been afraid. That realization followed her into the morning like a shadow. She stood before the mirror, adjusting the sleeve of her dress with steady fingers, her reflection calm, composed, almost untouched. But beneath that stillness, something restless lingered, something she could not afford to ignore. This house was dangerous. Not because of what was obvious, but because of what it awakened. A soft knock came at the door. "Breakfast is ready," a maid said from the other side. Zara took one last look at herself, her expression sharpening just slightly. Then she turned away. The dining room was already occupied when she arrived. The long table gleamed under the morning light, set with precision, silverware aligned perfectly, plates untouched, coffee steaming gently in delicate cups. Everything looked normal. But the people seated around it made it anything but. Liam sat lazily in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest, his posture relaxed in a way that felt intentional. His gaze lifted the moment Zara entered, and just like that, the air shifted. That same smile touched his lips. Slow. Knowing. As if the night before had not been an accident, but a beginning. But inside, her pulse betrayed her. Noah sat at the far end of the table, quiet as always. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't relaxed. He was watching. Closely. Carefully. His eyes moved from Zara to Liam. And something unreadable passed through them. Ethan was already seated. Waiting. When Zara reached his side, he looked up at her, not with suspicion, not with doubt, but with quiet warmth that felt almost undeserved. "Good morning," he said. Zara nodded slightly. "Good morning." She took her seat beside him. And just like that, the table was complete. For a moment, no one spoke. The faint clink of cutlery filled the silence as breakfast began, but it wasn't peaceful. It was controlled. Measured. Like everyone was waiting for something. Then, Noah cleared his throat. The sound was soft. But it cut through the room instantly. He didn't look at Zara. He looked straight at Ethan. Ethan, he began, his voice calm, almost casual, how was your wedding night? The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripple was immediate. A few servants froze momentarily before pretending not to listen. Liam's lips twitched. Somewhere down the table, a quiet laugh slipped out, quickly stifled. Zara felt the shift instantly. The tension. It wasn't curiosity. It was humiliation. Her fingers tightened slightly around her fork, though her face remained composed. Ethan didn't respond immediately. For a brief moment, the silence stretched, thick, uncomfortable, exposing. Then he spoke. It was fine. Short. Controlled. Unrevealing. Liam let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head slightly as if amused by the simplicity of the answer. Just fine, he murmured under his breath. Zara's gaze lowered briefly to her plate. Not in submission. In control. And then. She felt it. A touch. Light. Deliberate. Her foot. Under the table. Her body stilled instantly. She didn't look up. Didn't react. But she knew. Liam. His leg had extended forward, brushing against hers as though by accident. But nothing about it felt accidental. Slowly. He pressed just slightly. Testing. Zara's breath caught, barely noticeable, but enough for her to feel it. Her instincts screamed to pull away. To create distance. To shut it down. But she didn't. Not immediately. Across from her, Liam met her eyes. And winked. That same infuriating confidence lingered in his expression, like he already knew the effect he had. Zara held his gaze. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. Then. Very slightly. She shifted her foot. Not away. Just enough to let the contact remain. Liam's smile deepened. At the far end of the table, Noah had stopped eating. His gaze had sharpened, his attention no longer subtle. He had noticed. Of course he had. The air changed. Again. And then. Slam. Mama Eleanor's hand struck the table hard enough to rattle the cutlery. The sharp sound snapped through the room like a whip. Mind your manners. Her voice was calm. But firm. Absolute. The room fell silent instantly. Her gaze moved slowly across the table, settling briefly on Liam, then Noah, before returning to Ethan. We are here to eat, she continued. Not to entertain childish behavior. Liam leaned back slightly, raising his hands in mock surrender. Noah lowered his gaze. But neither of them spoke. Zara slowly withdrew her foot. This time. Liam didn't stop her. But his eyes never left her. Mama Eleanor's expression softened slightly as she turned her attention toward Ethan and Zara. You should not concern yourselves with unnecessary distractions, she said. Focus on what matters. There was a pause. A brief moment where it seemed the tension might dissolve. Then. She added, almost casually. I cannot wait to hold my grandchild. The effect was immediate. Silence. Deep. Heavy. Unavoidable. Her breath caught, just slightly. Across the table. Liam's smirk returned. Darker this time. More dangerous. Noah's gaze lifted again. Sharp. Focused. Unrelenting. Didn't speak. But Zara felt it. The weight of expectation. The pressure of something far greater than the tension already suffocating the room. A child. The word lingered in her mind, heavy with implication. Because suddenly. This wasn't just about power. Or manipulation. Or survival. This was something deeper.